Somewhere on the Giza Plateau, around 2560 BC, an ancient Egyptian looked up at the Great Pyramid and saw something that could genuinely hurt your eyes if you looked at it wrong. Not grey, not sand-coloured, white. A mirror white so bright that ancient writers described it flashing from far down the Nile. That flash wasn't decoration, it was engineered on purpose, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how it worked and exactly why it's gone. This video is about what the pyramids of Giza actually look like the day the builders walked away from them, not the sunburnt rubble sitting in your head right now. Most people assume the pyramids have always looked like this, rough, tan, stepped, worn down by 5,000 years of desert wind. But that image is wrong by about 4,500 years. The Great Pyramid you know isn't a monument, it's a skeleton. What stood on that plateau in 2560 BC was sheathed edge to edge in polished white limestone and crowned with a cap of gold and silver, bright enough that classical historians described the pyramids glowing like a second sun over the desert. By the end of this video, you won't be able to look at a photo of Giza the same way again, because we've rebuilt, stone by stone, what your eyes would actually have seen standing on that plateau the day Khufu's masons set the final block. This is drawn from the same archaeological record studied at Giza and by institutions like the National Museums of Scotland, cross-checked against a 2021 optical physics analysis of exactly how polished ancient limestone reflects sunlight. Start at the top, because that's where the ancient Egyptians started too. Every pyramid was designed to end in a single capping stone called a pyramidion, in Egyptian benbenet, named for the sacred benben stone. The mound Egyptians believed was the very first solid ground to rise out of the chaos waters at the beginning of creation. That's the setup. But here's what made it more than symbolism. Egyptologists describe that capstone as finished in electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, positioned specifically to catch the very first light of sunrise and the very last light of sunset before anything else on the plateau. Picture standing at the base of the Great Pyramid before dawn. The whole structure is still grey-blue in the half-light. Then the sun clears the horizon and the tip, just the tip, ignites first. A single point of gold fire floating nearly 480 feet above the desert floor, while the rest of the pyramid is still catching up to the light. Therefore, this wasn't metalwork for the sake of luxury. It was theology, built into architecture. Egyptians believed the pharaoh's soul launched from that exact point to join the sun god Ra on his daily crossing of the sky. So the capstone had to be the first thing his light touched and the last thing it let go of. That's the detail most documentaries skip entirely. The gold cap wasn't there to impress visitors. It was there to work, every single sunrise, as a piece of religious machinery. And the white limestone underneath it wasn't just reflective for show either. It was calculated. Here's the detail that made physicists start paying attention. In 2021, a researcher publishing through Archive actually ran the optics on Tura limestone, the fine white stone quarried 9 miles down the Nile that once cased the entire pyramid, and found something almost nobody expects. Polished limestone doesn't just scatter light evenly in every direction, the way a painted white wall does. It also produces a specular reflection, a genuine mirror glint, because a well-polished surface behaves optically closer to glass than to chalk. That's the mechanism. Here's what it actually looked like in practice. As the sun crossed the sky, that mirror glint would have swept across the pyramid's 4 faces like a slow-motion lighthouse beam. For one precise moment, from one precise angle, on one precise afternoon, the Great Pyramid wouldn't just glow, it would flash, brighter than the diffuse white surrounding it, visible from a specific point on the river at a specific hour of the day. Most people assume shiny white pyramid means a flat, static colour, like a wedding cake left out in the sun. But the truth is stranger than that. The pyramid was effectively an enormous, 4-sided mirror, slowly rotating relative to the sun, functioning less like a tomb and more like an instrument. These are the same builders already famous for aligning the Great Pyramid to true north within a fraction of a degree, using nothing but the stars. Now stack a working solar reflector on top of that achievement. So if this thing was genuinely this spectacular, the obvious question is, why does it look like a crumbling mountain today? The answer isn't that the pyramid quietly fell apart on its own. Limestone doesn't erode itself into rubble over a few thousand years. Tura limestone is dense, hard, comparable to marble. That's the context. Here's what actually happened. In 1303 AD, a massive earthquake struck the eastern Mediterranean and shook Cairo hard enough to crack and loosen the outer casing stones across the entire Giza plateau. But the earthquake didn't finish the job, people did. Starting in the 14th century, Mamluk sultans stripped the loosened white Tura limestone straight off the pyramids and hauled it across the river to build the city of Cairo, including mosques and fortresses that are still standing today. Therefore, the missing surface of the Great Pyramid isn't actually missing. It's just wearing a different address now, cemented into medieval Cairo architecture that tourists walk past every day without knowing they're looking at recycled pyramid. That single fact changes how you see an entire city. And it means the rough, stepped pyramid in every photograph you've ever seen isn't the ancient structure at all. It's the load-bearing core the casing stones were built to hide. The skeleton no ancient Egyptian ever intended you to see. So is there any physical proof any of this actually existed? Or are we just trusting ancient writers with a flair for exaggeration? Here's the context. A small amount of the original casing survived. Near the summit of the second Giza pyramid, built for King Khafre, a patch of the original polished limestone casing is still attached, high enough up that looters with ladders and ropes couldn't easily strip it away centuries ago, which is why that pyramid still appears to have a second, paler peak. But that's not the only surviving piece. One single casing block from the Great Pyramid itself, weighing more than 650 pounds, sits today in a glass case at the National Museums of Scotland, brought back from Giza in the 1800s by the astronomer Charles Piazzi Smith, and on public display ever since. Therefore, you can, right now, stand in front of an actual fragment of the Great Pyramid's original polished skin, in Edinburgh, 4,000 miles from the Nile. And for the gold, while no capstone has ever been recovered from Giza itself, a later pyramidion, belonging to Pharaoh Amenemhat III, from around 1860 BC, was excavated at Dahshur, carved from dark polished stone and, according to Egyptological sources, originally finished with gilded plating. That's not proof of Khufu's exact capstone. Scholars are upfront that no confirmed electrum capstone has ever been recovered from Giza, and that specific detail remains disputed. But it proves Egyptians had both the technology and the intention to gild a pyramid's peak in precious metal 1,000 years before Khufu, and kept doing it for generations after him. So the grey mountain in your head, a piece of it survived in Scotland, a piece of it survived at Khafre's summit, and the gilding tradition survived at Dahshur. The grey mountain was never the truth. It was just what got left behind. Here's the reframe worth sitting with. We call them the pyramids of Giza, but the people who built them never once saw a pyramid of Giza. They saw a mountain of light, white enough to hurt your eyes at noon, gold enough to catch fire at dawn, precise enough to behave like an instrument tracking the sun across the sky. What you've been calling ancient was never ancient to them. It was engineered, maintained, and brand new. So the next time someone shows you a photograph of the Great Pyramid, remember this. You're not looking at the Great Pyramid. You're looking at what was left after a city spent 700 years quietly wearing its skin, and somewhere in the walls of Cairo, catching the same sun it always did, a piece of that skin is still gleaming. You just don't know which stone.